This episode of The Unstarving Musician is sponsored by Liner Notes. Want to learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry professionals I've interviewed? Sign up for Liner Notes, my curated email newsletter where I share the best insights and knowledge gems from the show. From marketing and songwriting to touring and sync licensing, you'll get actionable tips delivered straight to your inbox every 2 weeks. And starting this month, Liner Notes Insider Edition will feature exclusive deep dives, detailed case studies, and premium content that goes beyond the podcast interviews. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com/liner notes. It's free to get started, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Happy New Year's. Welcome to episode 314. How are you? Where are you? What are you wearing? This episode features singer-songwriter Tony Harrah, who is back as part of my Storytellers series, where I've invited a handful of guests to join me for another chat because we had an especially memorable conversation in our first chat. In Tony's case, we last spoke in January of 2019, about this time of year. His wife had passed away unexpectedly a year before, or the year before, leaving him with 2 young boys, an unreleased new album, and an established music career that was slightly disrupted. Our conversation turned out this time to be quite long, so I've cut it into 2 parts. In this first part, we talk about remarried life, kind of finding happiness again, sailing the Gulf of Mexico for a music tour when the pandemic hit. That's kind of inconvenient. His books, including Boxing with God, Asking for a Playground Push, and Spare Parts. Moving from music to writing, the realization that marketing books is just like marketing music. Starting a writers group and comparing that to starting a blues jam. And the state of the pandemic recovery as it relates to the arts. All right, without further ado, here is me talking to Tony Harrah. So I was looking at my notes, and we spoke back on, or it's kind of very close to the same time of year anyway, but January 3rd, 2019.
Yeah, I was and a lot's happened with me. So I was that time I was widowed, and I'm remarried.
Oh wow!
And
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we've been married 4 years, close to 4.5. And I asked her, I was like, she was like, that doesn't ring a bell. And I was like, it must have been like right before I met you, like that. It had to have been close. So I was guessing it was in the early winter of 19. Yeah.
Now, is this the gal? So you had met someone when we spoke, and she said she had kids, but I can't remember how many, maybe 2.
So that is correct. So I did meet someone, and I think we spoke about it briefly. She was recently divorced, sort of had the rug pulled out from under her in life, and we were just friends, and it turned into more, and it was, and it was such a tough. It's funny when you look back on hindsight with any of it. She was great, and she's a wonderful mother, and she's a great person. And we were together about a year, and I didn't believe in that whole all your relationships after you lose someone will never last. But we both had been through a lot of traumatic stuff, and we were related through the baseball field. Like, she was one of the baseball moms, and that's how I was a coach, and she was on the team. So the team had been doing a lot of things to help, for my family. And so that's how we really met originally. And that next year, it was kind of clear, like there was some baggage she was carrying about what she would and would not sort of do to put herself in that kind of vulnerable position again in life, which I can completely respect. And also, she was a very, as 2 of the closest people I've known were a husband and wife pastor team who had pastored all over the world. One was the wife was the preacher for sure, and the husband was the theologian, and that's just sort of how they made that work. And the wife told me one time after we'd split up, she said she was a very traditional girl, Tony, and you're not a very traditional man. And I mean that in the most loving, honest statements I could put out. But she said, you don't do well with traditional people. Like, you live life sort of large, and you live life sort of by the seat of your pants, and there's a lot of great stories that come out of those things, but she wasn't for you. And she said, I could see that. Like, she was a great person, and so 6 months later, I met somebody who was non-traditional without looking, really. I was like, that's great advice, I appreciate that. But sort of it kind of came the way it was. And she ran a music magazine locally here in Charleston, and we met. She came out to one of my shows to do an article, and we ended up hanging out that evening, and then, you know, and how life goes. And then I sailed the Gulf of Mexico for part of a music tour. We left March 19th of 2020. And you know what that was. And so while we were
while you were sailing. Wow.
Yeah. While we were stuck on a sailboat, the world starts shutting down. Getting home became harder and harder because our truck, my truck, with the was hours away, and everybody, it was just chaos, you know. And so we came back home. When we got home, most of all the shows were canceled. I played like one show, and every day they were just falling like dominoes. Of course, you know, at the time we were still going, this will blow over, and then it just got worse and worse and worse. And so we came home, and we started having to homeschool our kids because, you know, the schools were all shut down, and my wife was homeschooled. And so she took to it very easily. And it was my bass player who was on that journey with me. And when I said, I think I'm going to ask her to marry me, he's like, I wondered when you'd figure it out. And so I asked her, and we got married in the height of COVID in August of that year with a little outdoor wedding at our little farm home up here in West Virginia. And, you know, everybody appropriately socially distanced with their masks and 6 feet apart. But it was still a beautiful ceremony. That was that year that I wrote a book called Boxing with God, which was it was about me finding redemption and my anger and getting past that with the man upstairs of losing my father and then losing my wife in a short amount of time, and sort of kind of being forsaken, I guess, for lack of a better term, and coming to terms with that. And it was about that trip of sailing the Gulf of Mexico. So
is this not the woman that you met when we spoke then, or it is?
Yeah, no, it's no. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I think you alluded to it, but I just wasn't positive.
Yeah, so it was not the woman. We had split up, and amicably, of course. We're still friends to this day, and she had 2 kids, and I'm still root for her kids. I'm the middle school baseball coach here in town, and I coached him in baseball at the middle school level, and then I met this woman in spring of 19, and then we got married in late summer of 2020.
Wow, that's cool. That's very cool. And what an unusual trip you must have had. I saw that you did some sailing. Now, I didn't look at I don't remember the date. I didn't write it down, but I saw a post, which I know you don't do a lot of, it seems like lately, but on Facebook about being drawn to Galveston in a sailboat. Was that the same trip or a different one?
That was a different trip.
Later, probably?
Yes, it was later. Yes. We took subsequent trips. In fact, the only one we haven't got to take is we were going to do the Chesapeake Bay for 2.5 weeks. And Galveston. Yeah. And I love Texas in itself. And I don't know, like the whole port cities, the Gulf of Mexico, and the commercial trade that goes along with that, and the lifestyle that goes. I'm a big fan of Adam Carroll, the songwriter. He does a lot of talking about that southeastern Texas, southwestern Louisiana lifestyle, and a life of working on the water that I'm not aware of. Like around here it was railroads and coal mines and farms, and so that seemed like a fantasy writing to me, so I've always been kind of drawn to learn more about it. And I it's funny, once I stopped touring music, I don't post on Facebook like I used to. It used to be really often, and it wasn't with any intent that I just gave up with it. It's just the more I've spent doing, the less I've spent, telling about it. And that's like the worst marketing on the planet. I get it. But like, I don't know, with older age, I felt like it comes across as brash, maybe. I don't know. I released that book, Boxing with God, and I promoted it really heavily, like I did my music, and then I spent the next couple of years working on some different books, kind of figuring one horse would kind of peak ahead of the crowd, and I would then focus on it solely. And I did, and I released that book, this full-length book, this past June, but it didn't near as much marketing, And I was really proud of it, but I guess I've maybe come to a place of my own insecurity, or I don't know, age, where it's like I sort of did these for me. Like, I would love nothing more than to be able to like write and just sit at home and write and then like be paid for it, but it's like, I sort of did this for me. I did this, and then people want to read it, they will. I'd rather give the book to somebody for free if they promise to read it than sell it to somebody who just puts it on their shelf to say they supported me, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's a really dumb way to market anything monetarily.
Books are hard, and as is music, right? But like just getting them out there.
Yeah. It was funny because when I wrote Boxing with God, I was still avidly touring up until March, right? So I had a lot of fans in the Southeast, in the Gulf, in the Mid-Atlantic, where I toured very heavily, and some in the Midwest. COVID shut down. I did some of those online shows with the virtual tip jar thing until like June. That was terrible. I mean, for a musician who's insecure in the first place, having no audience reaction, just quiet and people putting a thumbs up, it's like terrible. I mean, I couldn't do it. So when I write this book, I sell 1,500 copies.
That's not bad.
Yeah. And like, I was like, wait a minute. Okay. So first off, it doesn't cost $30,000 to make the book.
Right.
So it's cheaper than a record. And I immediately sold more of them. And so I was like, oh, this is it. This is all the years of writing. I always wanted to write books. And I did write one when I was 19. And I got some interest from a publishing company, and this is what I've been building for. This is where I'm at,
Mm-hmm.
But like with anything else, the reality set in. And so, I work on the other books, and I'm making posts, and I'm sharing snippets of things I'm writing to get people excited for my next book and whatever. Books require, like, you can put on a record and just kind of do your life. And with a book, you have to dedicate your time to the book. And people are always like, do you do an audiobook? Like, I'd do the audiobook. And I'm like, yeah, it sort of kind of ruins it, don't you think? Like, I don't know. And so when I did the second one, I realized there's market like this. It's just as tough. It's just as tough as the music industry. It just took me time to catch up. So when I got back from vacation in September, a couple months after releasing Spare Parts, I decided, that I've always been adverse to the short story poetry books, right? And children's books, right? Because to me, every time I talk to somebody who's not a writer, who has no discipline to write, always kind of gives me the same thing when I say I write, or I write songs, or I write stories or whatever. And they say, oh yeah, I'm a writer too. And I'm like, oh yeah. And they're like, yeah, I'm writing a book of short stories, or I'm writing a children's book. And it seems to be the easiest way to get into something that's like, seems the easiest, right? It's like somebody saying like, yeah, I'm a musician. Like, I'm going to release a single. It's like, oh. So I felt like I couldn't really do a book of short stories or whatever until I provided something with a discipline of a whole book. So I did 2. I thought, okay, I can do this. So while working through some of these like 20-page short stories I've been writing, and I've been really enjoying that, I was like, all right, I got to do some marketing. Like, that's my goal for 2025, is to market myself as an author and hit it hard. And so the last quarter, I set up a lot of things in place, and then this fell into my lap. And then next week, I've got, I'm putting on a presentation for one of the county's literature departments that I was invited to. So I guess, I kind of threw it into the universe, and the universe said, yeah. We'll help you out with that. So
that's nice. Well, yeah. Hopefully this will be a great practice run talking about them. So I saw one title asking for a playground push, but got a schoolyard shove. And then is Spare Parts another book as well?
Yes. So there's Boxing with God, the 10 years led me, that one. And, and then in June, I released a book called Spare Parts, The Existential Journey of a Man Through Machine.
That's nice.
And it was, I wear a lot of hats, and I don't like to be the blowhard who just horns on and on about all the things they've done all the time, because there's enough of those people out there. But I've been a biker and a blue collar wrencher on old Harley Davidsons and motorcycles since I was about 12 years old.
Really?
And it was looking back, I was in a Christian motorcycle organization for a decade or so. And spiritually, it was flat to me. And I left several years ago. And I joined started prospecting for a club called BACA, Bikers Against Child Abuse, a couple of years ago. And it was a lot you know, in those organizations, it's not, you don't just get to join because you're a Christian or a good person. Like, they got to really vet you through. And we work with supporting abused children, protecting them through the court system, seeing them through and giving them the power to stand up to their abuser. And I got to thinking during that journey about how motorcycles have been this really big catalyst through a lot of identity and existential questioning I've had throughout my life. And it's always been this sort of constant. And so I picked out 10 or so of those times in my life where those bikes I had that provided me with either shelter from the oncoming storms of life or really tough life lessons. And, you know, I set about sort of writing this orchestra of my life through the eyes of a blue collar, you know, motorcycle mechanic, and motorcycles being this sort of purpose, or helping me find my purpose in life.
Is that Spare Parts?
It's called Spare Parts. Yes.
Cool.
Which is, ironically, or not ironically, my road name in the biker community.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
And which is even a longer story that I tell in the book. And so, for the intent of leaving a little magic left of it, I won't give that away, but you can find that out in there. But the Playground Push, I was working on helping a friend publish a book of poetry. And during that time, I have been collecting poetry. Yeah, I've been written for years, stuff that was songs, stuff that wasn't songs, you know, all that stuff. And I keep it in this folder, and said, you know, I was going to do this poem a day sort of challenge to myself. And it's like, you know, you got 365 poems in a year, boil them down to 100, you know, that's a good poetry book, you know. And so while I've been working on that and some other writing projects, I thought, you know, a lot of my songs were always story driven as a folk musician. And I never was an amazing musician. Like, I've been a drummer in rock bands. I can play the bass. I play the guitar fairly well. I've been a lead guitar player. I play the piano. I play the banjo. You know, I play the slide guitar, which is probably one of the better things I do, the dobro. But I'm not great at any of them. They were always there to serve the ability for me to get my lyrics out. Like, the whole idea was, listen to my stories. I'm a listening room kind of person. And so I started formatting some of my songs into poetry format. And then in delving into it, it was like, oh man, that whole album we didn't get to make during COVID with a company out of Need to Know Records out of San Diego. We had worked a deal, and then of course it got shut down to COVID. Then I stopped touring. It's like, man, this record is like some of my best writing. I'll include that. Then I started finding songs that just sounded like another song, so we just scrapped it. But the lyrics were amazing, and I figured I'd work on it, but then I didn't. And from 2015 to 2019, I just kept those years because I really liked what I was writing in those times. I found like 75 songs, formatted them, boiled them down to 65, and put this little poetry book together. And just, you know, titled a lyrical poetry book. So, you know, just so it would kind of be honest in what it was. Released it right in the middle of December.
Cool. When we spoke last time, you were in a songwriting group. I'm just curious that you meant, you know, because this is a book of lyrical poetry, if some of that work or much of that work came from that group, and do you still do that kind of thing? Or?
So the answer to that is yes, a lot of that. In fact, a lot of the album that when I was doing that last interview with you, I was getting ready to release an album, Unicorns, where we released July of that year. It was supposed to have been released in 18 because we went to the studio just like 2 months after my wife had passed away.
Oh, wow.
We already had it booked and we couldn't really move it and blah, blah, blah. And so by the time we got through all of it, 18 was just tough. And so I just couldn't get it released. So we released it in 19. 75% of the music on that album was from that songwriting group. Then I found, a lot of the unreleased stuff that's in Asking for a Playground Push is from that writing group. And nice. I'm no longer a part of that writing group. Sometime in 2020, we decided to take a break. Just, you know, everybody was just dealing with all of it, you know, and imagine. You would think that, well, we're at home, we might as well be in the writing group. But man, it was just tough, you know, and then, you know, you sort of get used to being at home by yourself and not seeing people. And you're like, I sort of like this. Right. And so we were like, and then, you know, they go to kick back up about 3 months later, and I'm in the midst of writing Boxing with God. And I was like, hey, I think I'm going to sit out this session And that session became 4 years.
Wow.
But I would say that writing group did more for my songwriting than anything else ever has before, because it wasn't like, I don't know, it was like and as adverse as I am to an enabler, that's all it was just a big group of enablers. That's all it was. Like, no one said, well, you're really leaving your theme. Like, there was no criticism. It was, here's this line or statement you have to write a song with. It has to be at least 2 minutes long. Like, the parameters were always the same. You have to submit it by Sunday or you're out of the group, and you just keep going. And everybody was always positive. It was always, even if it wasn't a lot, I was like, hey, I really love the cadence of this, or I really love the whatever. So it wasn't in any kind of way constructive criticism. It was always, you're doing a great job. You're really good at this. And I'm not the biggest believer in that on the planet with everything in the world, but in that place, in the music songwriting thing, it was beautiful. And it kept everybody moving and progressing and pushing themselves. And I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 other members that I still stay close with, that they release songs, through a record company. And I'm like, when he uses that line, coffee on the counter. Yeah. Well, I use that same line in Good Man. And that's because that was our writing prompt that week, 5 years ago. Yeah. And I really like Abe Partridge down in Mobile, Alabama, who has been to Europe several times now. He was one of the gatekeepers of that group. And I can't tell you how many of his songs I listened to are like, oh, it's from the group, and it really was a blessing for everybody involved.
That's cool. I was in a writing group kind of like that, with a similar kind of like it's a non-critique, but, positive feedback, encouraging you to write. And it was in Panama. I was at this really cool place called Tranquilo Retreat, I believe. I know it had the word Tranquilo in it. It was a Canadian woman that ran it, and she was a teacher and also like a writing coach. And it was really nice. And I actually ended up with a couple of songs out of there, and have continued more recently trying to work some new songs up because of that. But it was really great training, for writing.
I'm actually wanting to try my hand at sort of a J.R. Tolkien style writing fellowship collective, like a writing collective. And on this one, I want to do something a little deeper. I don't want to put on like a writing class type of thing. I don't think I have the credentials to deal with it. And then number 2, I'm looking for, selfishly, my own advancement through it too. And so I was wanting to kind of open it only to authors who have published works and are avidly working on a current project to publish, and sort of get together monthly and kind of go and all of us sort of see this project from each person come to fruition, and work with them through, obviously you say critique, but really is just encouragement, right? And kind of help them shape that to work towards a finished product. The only reason I sort of don't want to do it and it was the same way in that writing group. Like, they didn't just take anybody who said they were a songwriter. Like, there was a gatekeep to it. And I don't know if the parameters sometimes where I've got a good feeling about this guy, or, he's vouched by somebody else that I know that's legitimate. But what you're looking for is people that take it seriously, really, is what it is, because everything sounds like a great idea until you're in the guts of having to release a song every Sunday night, week after week, 52 weeks a year. So I'd like to do the same thing in the writing realm, but I find that it's a little more difficult. And I'm not sure why yet.
Which part is difficult?
Either A, people are already in writing groups. B, which I don't, we're a little bereft of writing groups in my area anyway. So for what few there are, I think some are kind of taken in that. And then 2, there is a little bit of, the literary word carries, without, I hate to say it, a little bit of arrogance to it, I've noticed that some people are like, oh, well, I'm sort of beyond that. And I'm like, well, that's the thing. I'm wanting to create something for that, for people that are already in, you know what I mean? Like sort of a people that have released it. We're not talking about a beginner's thing. And I still think it kind of comes across as, yeah, I think I'm past that. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that's a little discouraging. But yeah, otherwise I'm not really sure. I thought it would be like when I put it together, I thought for sure it'd be easy, right? I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then it was like, interest is low.
Yeah, well, I wonder if I have a friend, Laura Price, a musician also, and I met her through a blues jam in San Jose, California, and she's got a rich recording history, and she's a great entertainer, singer, and lives in Austin now. But she's been on the podcast, and I was telling her, I'd really like to start a blues jam, and I was kind of asking her. Well, hers was very important to me because I was new in California at the time, and she was super encouraging of my playing and participation, and she, because of her, I met a lot of musicians. So, anyway, she said, when I'm asking her for tips on it, and she said, when you first start one, she goes, if you want it to be blues, that's great. She goes, but you probably have to have it more open mic-ish in the beginning and let it be open to whatever. And then as you meet more people and kind of get the thing going, you can kind of filter down to blues stuff, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I wonder if trying to establish a writing group of this nature is sort of the same, that maybe you start with more of kind of an open concept, and then eventually you can encourage those that come in the beginning to do the thing that more appropriate for where they are, what they want to do, and then eventually find the niche of people that you're hoping to get.
Yeah, that's it's really insightful, honestly, because and it's as you're saying it, I'm over here going like, why didn't I think of this, right? Like it is really insightful, and the honesty is, if there is somebody who's a newer writer who's dedicated enough to their craft that they are working towards even their first work, or they need help, and if they're that dedicated and stick around, then that's the kind of people you want anyways. And if you do start something with a more open concept, people tend to filter themselves out if they don't have the dedication or whatever they want, or the genre they're in, or whatever. And as you grow more connections, like you said, you probably don't even have to do a lot of the filtering. A lot of the filtering will probably take care of itself, and then you've just got your core. Yeah, so that's probably a smart way to go about it. I guess I naively thought that I would. My wife has a French macaron bakery here in town, here in Nitro, called Bake My Day. She has like a running steal a book, leave a book, sort of like the take a penny, leave a penny tray at the gas stations, She has a library there, and she encourages people to donate books, and then you can take a book, steal a book, leave a book, whatever you want to do. And then the only ones that are for sale are local authors, in which she features, a new local author every month, and then sort of an incumbent, and then, that transitions out and do readings. And then she's been doing some musical stuff there as well.
So cool.
So I thought, I'll put this thing out. We're going to meet there once a week, be good for her business. She's a coffee shop as well, a musician friend of mine said one of the biggest things that suffered after COVID was social commitment. And that sort of hit me hard, because I kind of felt like I definitely was at blame for that as well. I used to be quite the socialite, and although I am getting older, and I know some of that goes with that, I think I got so used to being stuck at home that I never felt like it was stuck at home anymore. And I just like being here with the kids and doing my own thing and writing and being a hermit. And so I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. It is really hard. Open mic nights aren't as busy as they used to be. We're 3 years out from the original ground zero of COVID. I remember somebody saying, oh, I've heard that when this COVID thing finally comes to some sort of end, it's going to be like the roaring 20s of the arts and music, And that made sense to me. Everybody's going to be cooped. Everybody's going to blow back, and the music scenes and the art scenes are going to be crazy. But at least here, it's been a slow resuscitation. You know what I mean? It hasn't been what I thought it would be. And I don't know if that's just here or that's across the board, or, how does it look, where you're at?
I noticed and spoke to people about it, and sort of an economic impact, which obviously we all noticed, but it lingered for a long time. And Querétaro's like a university town. It's a hugely growing city, but you can see the slow return to commercial growth. I mean, there's a lot of housing going on because a lot of people want to live here, but and then if you sort of zoom in on places that want to support the arts, you notice it has kind of its own lag time of getting back going. So and there's a lot of great musicians here too. Maybe an overabundance for its own good with the number of places that there are or aren't
right
to play. So it's probably, kind of a worldwide thing. Maybe I'm sure some places are doing better than others, but yeah, we've noticed it here. I think everyone's kind of forgotten, but I don't know. I was maybe because we were in Panama at the height of the pandemic and on a beach, and really in a way in a great place, but there were some downsides to being there. But and then stepping out, and also going into the States a couple of times and stepping out and seeing what it was like in Mexico at the sort of the official end of the the mad part of the pandemic. Right. You can see these sort of economic impacts, and I mean, like global supply chain. I think it was a little timing that was changing anyway. And I know this sort of sounds like, well, what does that have to? Maybe sounds like, or would to some people, like, what does that have to do with the local open mic scene and in my town? But it's all related, right? To economies everywhere. So yeah, I've noticed it too. That concludes part 1 of this 2-part series with Tony Harrah. I hope you'll join me for the next episode. As an independent podcaster, your support means the world to me. You could even say I depend on it. With that in mind, here are some things that you can do to support the podcast. You can sign up for liner notes at unstarvingmusician.com. That's my email newsletter where I share some of the best knowledge insights garnered from conversations featured here. You can sign up at unstarvingmusician.com, or you could also visit our crowd sponsor page at unstarvingmusician.com/crowdsponsor to learn about all the other ways of supporting the podcast, including an easy online tip jar. It's just click, tip, done, easy, and super appreciated. You can also follow, review, and or share the podcast if you really enjoyed today's episode or any other episode. It has a big impact on our audience growth, so I really appreciate it. Want to boost your online presence and support this podcast at the same time? You can visit bandzoogle.com and use the promo code ROBONZO, that's ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. How does this help the podcast? Bandzoogle pays us a small commission if you sign up for a paid plan at no extra cost to you. I use bandzoogle.com for my artist website, robonzo.com, and the way it helps easily managed direct-to-fan marketing and sales with features like commission-free stores and nothing short of greatness. So visit bandzoogle.com, use the promo code ROBONZO, ROBONZO, and you will be helping us and yourself at the same time. Thanks again for joining. I look forward to doing this again for you. Until next time, peace, love, and a whole lot of gratitude.